So we'll get started this morning. Welcome to Before It's Too Late, an educational symposium organized by concerned citizens who recognize the enduring value of Shockoe Bottom's historical and cultural resources. These resources are evidence of the trials and triumphs of those who came before us and may hold as yet unexplored gems of wisdom. These gems include evidence of stories, such as those of freed blacks who purchased enslaved family members to keep that family together. We have experts, scholars, and historians here today who have spent much of their lives studying Shockoe Bottom, writing books about it, and perusing through old maps, photographs, and documents. Others dug into the soil of Shockoe Bottom with their own hands. The mayor of Richmond may finally be on board by announcing an archaeology initiative with a mandate to preserve our historical and cultural resources. We applaud that the mayor, as he went beyond previous statements that made mere mention of the significance of the cultural and historical resources of Shockoe Bottom, by announcing this initiative of action. However, like President Ronald Reagan had said to the former Soviet Union after signing a comprehensive nuclear arms reduction agreement, trust but verify. It took the commitment and engagement of people from multiple racial and ethnic groups who stood in lines at city council meetings, held programs on their own, including vigils during cold winter evenings, and took other actions, many not reported in print or broadcast on media, that resulted in this change in policy or policy priorities. Passionate community engagement produced this game changer, which may soon hit a tipping point. But until then, trust but verify. It will take an even stronger and concentrated engagement of concerned citizens to make sure that this archaeology initiative is actually implemented. And if it does take place, that it proceeds according to the highest standards, procedures, and protocols of this profession. Even amidst intense stakeholder pressure, corners can't be cut. Important protocols can't be overlooked. Important details can't be ignored. And they won't, because we will trust but verify. This symposium was organized to provide you information about archaeology that will help you understand how archaeology actually works. You will have an understanding of the timeline of this process and why suggestions that this exhaustive process can take place in a matter of months suggest skipping steps or rushing irresponsibly. That's why we trust but verify. This symposium will also help you learn how you, although you may not be a scholar or expert or historian, can become a part of community archaeology. You will learn why transparency is important and why this process must be done right, and we must trust but verify before it's too late. Our first session will take a long view of the history of Shockoe Bottom by Harryk, our Richmond historian and a senior writer at Richmond Magazine. He will be followed by a discussion of the slavery-related history and industry of Shockoe Bottom by Dr. Philip Schwartz, Professor Emeritus at VCU. Businesses sprouted like wildflowers as a result of slavery, which suggests that a large number of undiscovered remains, artifacts, and the like may permeate throughout Shockoe Bottom, and not just the areas referred to by the ongoing public debate. This session will be followed by lunch, and our third section will begin at 1:05. And we will discuss archaeological findings from the Lumpkins jail site by Dr. Matthew Laird, partner and senior researcher at the James River Institute for Archaeology. This session will be the first of several that will give you an idea of what archaeology is and why it's important for the preservation of cultural resources. You will also recognize that archaeology is more than putting a shovel in the ground to see if you find something that gives you pause. Mr. Richard Kirchin of the Virginia Department of Historic Resources will discuss the Federal 106 process. More importantly, Although we applaud the mayor for his initiative, it does not substitute for the Federal 106 process. Mr. Kirchin will help you understand why. Our fifth and final session will include a discussion of community archaeology that will include Dr. Pam Cressy, former archaeologist for the City of Alexandria, and adjunct professor of anthropology at George Washington University, and Mr. David Herring, a member of the Richmond Slave Trail Commission. This panel will be facilitated by Terry Brock, a PhD candidate and research archaeologist for the Montpelier Foundation. The day will conclude with a discussion of next steps, which will especially highlight what we can do to make sure that archaeological projects designed to preserve our historical and cultural resources are conducted properly and with fidelity to the highest standards of the profession. It will include ideas on what you can do as we trust but verify before it's too late. And now for a few housekeeping details. Each presentation is a standalone presentation of facts and information. So presenters will present that information in the first 20 to 25 minutes or so, followed by a Q&A session. And each of those sessions is described in your program. We ask that you write out your questions on index cards provided. If you need one, raise your hand and our volunteers will see that you get one. They will be collected and passed along to Dr. Tadamy, who will sort and organize them to make sure as many can be addressed during the session. If your questions aren't answered during the session, then your response will be posted in the written proceedings. And please note that we will provide written proceedings within a week of the conference. It's being videotaped and that will be posted on our website as well. And it's also being audio taped, so there's going to be a podcast. And during the concluding panel, however, presenters will give about 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by a guided discussion and a Q&A period from the floor. Box lunches are available again. We are working on a shoestring budget, so they are for sale. Refreshments are free, though. The library is open until 5 p.m. Our day ends at 4. And patrons upstairs are encouraged to come down and join us. We have a number of volunteers to help us during the day so that if you need anything, look for someone with a smiley face on their name tag. The day is information dense and packed with information. And so without further ado, let's get started. And so again, to begin with, we have Mr. Harry Kollatz, and you have his bio in your program, so I won't read it. But please note that his books have been published and the short story anthology commemorating the 150th, not 159th, commemoration of the American Civil War. His recent story on Shockoe Creek, written in the Richmond magazine, can be accessed online via our website. I present to you the talented and creative writer, Mr. Harry Kollatz.
For me? Thank you. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for being here. I look out and I see plenty of familiar faces who know about 5 times as much as I've ever forgotten about Shockoe, so sorry that you're getting me first. But I was charged with the task of giving you the long view. And it's a very long view, which I cannot possibly get into everything. But I want to start with, and I don't have any AV. Can you hear me? I hate standing behind podiums. I'm not a podium guy. August of 1924. There appears above the fold of the Richmond Times-Dispatch a photograph of a large, dark object. It looks like it came from space. But it didn't. It came from 30 feet underground. It's part of a ship. It's 20 feet long. Probably a brig-rigged vessel. It was burned on the inside. Nobody knew why. Perhaps from the evacuation fire of 1865 or some other calamity that it befell, but it wound up 30 feet underground beneath Shockoe. Probably somewhere around 17 and Dock, somewhere in that area. They also found pilings lined up in a row in that area that marked a wharf or dock line. They were also 30 feet beneath ground, and then further 30 feet into the ground. And also perfectly preserved, because as many of you know, this is how the Imagineers of Venice built that town, by sinking pilings down. And so they were saying, well, this is probably where the old waterfront was. They were finding all kinds of things in the mid-20s underneath Shockoe. Why were they finding them? They were finding them because the city was undergoing its first real huge engineering project to control Shockoe Creek and to prevent flooding. The city had been sued not once but twice in state court, higher Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, the mayor then, I'm amazed that Fulmer Bright, who was known to be very pinch penny crazy, actually acceded to this. But he didn't like the city didn't like to get sued, so they began this massive multi-million-dollar engineering program, basically to create sluices and a gateway for the mouth of Shockoe Creek, and then to turn it into a culvert, essentially a sewer, which effectively it had been for most of the 19th and into the 20th centuries. But it hadn't always been that way, because it had the original name, or as near as we know, because the English are using phonetics to translate from Algonquin, which is what the native peoples spoke. But it had the name of, and I don't want to mispronounce it because I don't want to offend any of our Algonquins in the audience, because I know there are some. Cheyenne, or Chinook, was the original name of what the people who lived here called it, the first people. And it flowed from about where Harvey and Carlton Roads are, just east of Mechanicsville Turnpike, and comes down about 200 feet and drains more than 12 square miles and 8,000 acres. It gave its name, essentially, or was renamed by those who came here, the English and their friends. But also, Shockoe is a place, you won't find any archaeological evidence of this. It's where one of the first big lies was told. I want to take you back to April of 1607. Captain Christopher Newport and his band of adventurers coming up from Jamestown, where they had just barely settled down after the big long trip. And they come up to James in their shallop, and they have a very interesting time. They meet people along the way. They're entertained. They get a guy drunk, and they think he's going to die. No, Christopher Newport says, no, he'll be better tomorrow. And of course, he was better, and they all thought he was a healer. And that's thus beginning the unfortunate history of our relationships with the natives for the rest of our existence. So they come up, they get as far as probably 14th Street in that area. Christopher Newport's got a bee in his bonnet. He wants to get to this place he's hearing about called Queerank. Queerank is probably going to be the Northwest Passage, so they can get around the United States, or get around the North America and to the Pacific. He's hearing all kinds of stories about precious metals and that kind of thing. So he wants to get on with it. Well, what he's encountered, the guy who's this sort of impromptu guide is named Powhatan. Powhatan was one of the many children of another guy whose name you're probably all familiar with, Powhatan. And Powhatan, by the way, had a very interesting way of controlling his confederacy, his group of tribes. This is not uncommon in peoples who don't have much and have to figure out a way to organize. He would go around to the various tribes under his leadership. There would be a young woman there who would be chosen for him, and they would have a child. So it's kind of difficult to take up arms against your enemy when you're related. Of course, this didn't always work out, particularly in Europe, but it worked out for a long time, and made Powhatan a pretty respected and long-serving leader. Now, there were some glitches. 1607, 1606. Now, again, we're hearing this second, third hand. Powhatan is told that one of his seers tell him, one of his prophets tell him that there is a tribe coming up the Chesapeake's and they're going to take him, they want to challenge his rule and take over. And so what does Powhatan do? Well, he does what any ruler does to quash a revolution. He goes and kills them all. Unfortunately, the seer got his date wrong. The English landed in 1607, and they proceeded to roll up his kingdom, slowly but surely. But we think Powhatan probably wanted a Hong Kong arrangement. Keep them down in Jamestown and let them die off, and we can just clean it up afterwards. Didn't quite work out that way. Christopher Newport, Gabriel Archer, John Smith, all those glittering grand names, those big wonderful boots, they come up, and they're on the island, and they want to get to Queerwright. Well, Powhatan has a guide, has a translator, interlocutor, diplomat named Narius. That's what his name comes down to us as. And I want to imagine this conversation. So Christopher Newport saying, we want to go to the mountains to the west of here. We got gold to find. We got a river we got an ocean to span. We need to go. And Narius is saying, dude, that's not cool. You might have said it just that way to Buddy and Galpin. Dude, that's just not cool. Because we got the Monicans, man. How should I put this? They're frenemies with us. They kind of like us and kind of don't like us. And we have this demilitarized zone called Chesterfield County and parts of Goochland. And they're kind of separated from us, and we like it that way. We can hunt in there, and we can forage in there, but we're not supposed to be fighting with each other because... And then you show up, look at you, what's all this hair? And you're encased in metal, and you stink. God, you stink. Because they stink. Because it's very hot, it's April, and they're in metal, and they're all covered with hair, and it's very strange that they're talking to them. And so somehow, Narius persuades Christopher Newport to say, okay, all right, we're not going to go any further west than here. So what do they do? What does he do? He puts up a cross, Jacobus Rex, he claims it all for the king. Which, of course, is a concept that the Powhatans don't have. But Powhatan's not stupid, he can see what's going on, and he says, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? And Narius, how he explained it away, things would have come into a very rapid end had Powhatan decided to take some of those guys hostage, kill one of them, send the head back downriver, whatever he wanted to do, it would have held up settlement here for another, who knows, 50 years longer than it actually took. But he didn't do that. Somehow, Narius and Powhatan got Powhatan to just say, okay, fine, just go. Just go! Put up your cross and go! Which is what they did. And that's where it all happened. Right there. Segue a little further up. April of 1865, the day after the evacuation fire. Charles Coffin, Boston Herald newspaper reporter, standing on the banks of the canal. There are men there cleaning out the debris from that had been thrown in there, blown up, everything's just trashed. So they're cleaning out the canal. Charles Coffin is sitting there and he's writing about this. Yonder, this is about 70th and Dock, just south of Bottoms Up Pizza. And he sees this guy get out of a rowboat. Very tall man, all dressed in black, very high. He's holding a little boy's hand by the left hand, actually. He's got 12 Marines around and an admiral. And he looks at the guy and says, "He says, oh, I suspect just a few days ago you gentlemen were slaves." "Yes, sir." "That'd be right." I look up because I believe your liberator is at hand. Abraham Lincoln walks out of a rowboat, not knowing where he is, not knowing that he is about to walk into what had been until a few days ago one of the largest slave trading districts in the country. Lost, doesn't know where he is. David Dixon Porter, the admiral, had had a really bad day. The River Queen that was supposed to deposit this big, huge, chuffing ship was supposed to deposit the president at Rocket's Landing, which is where the big wharf was. Well, they couldn't get there because the Confederates had sunk boats and made all kinds of obstacles. The boat couldn't get through. So they put out on what was called the Admiral's launch, commanded by Mr. Farragut, and who probably ran it aground. By the way, a court-martial offense. And so then they put the president, his son, by the way, it's Tad's birthday today, that day. They put him off on the lawn, on a rowboat. So there the Marines are rowing the president to Richmond, and they get stuck on rocks somewhere near Mayles Island, and Lincoln makes the remark, well, looks like the Army's going to have to come to the rescue of the Navy. So they finally get dislodged, and they just, like, let's go to the first place we can get to, and that turns out to be right there near 70 the dock. Most of that land is shifted a great bit. That's where a great deal of the river control, flood control system equipment there is now. So they come out and they come across the pontoon bridge, and as a historian Mike Gorman says, who actually figured all this out after many years, it's like the time at a rock concert when the lights go out, because that's when everybody starts piling out of those buildings, realizing, oh, the word just gets around. Abraham himself, Lincoln, is in the streets of Richmond. And there's a huge mob of people, mostly African American, but also you've got a bunch of German and Irish immigrants who've been working on the docks there who are closet unionists. You know, they had lip service to the Confederate cause, but they wanted to keep their jobs. They had families and so forth, so they're in the mix too. Somewhere around the corner there, he gets up to 17th. It's warm. It's April. It's in Richmond, and plus the city is still simmering from a fire. So he's really hot. So he sits down on a piece of pile of rubble, probably. We don't know exactly what. Accounts differ. All of the accounts differ in this case. He either wept, or he prayed, or he both. There was a woman who might have crouched down and prayed, and he told her, no, you don't do that anymore. You stand up. That's what this all is about. And then he started to go up. Now you have to remember, here's First Market, and the street grid is very different. The street grid's been totally messed up by parking lots and so forth. They would have gone around the market, but Franklin Street ran straight through. He would have, there at 14th and Franklin, two Union generals come at opposite ends because they're thinking that Lincoln's supposed to show up. He was supposed to show up at Rockets. There was going to be cannon firing and so forth to announce that the president arrived. The president's here. The president's here. Well, there's Lincoln, standing there. And the general, sir, may I help you? Well, yes, you may. I'm trying to find headquarters. And so they take him up Old 14th Street to what had been just a few days prior the White House of the Confederacy, and where he asked for a glass of water. These things happened in China. It was a town within itself. It grew up that way. It was an active, vital place. Immigrants from around the world came to Shockoe to live, to begin their first rung climb to mercantile success. They founded churches. They founded institutions. They began life in this country. And this is the place where Richmond was born. It is where some of our most tragic and some of our most triumphant events occurred. Now I'm going to just talk amongst yourselves. I don't have any audio visual, so all you get is me. So, well, anyway, one of the things that happened, Shockoe became a place of, how should I say, vice. Always happened. This is where our first saloons were built, our first tavern, the Eagle Tavern, the Byrd in Hand. In fact, early Richmonders may have called that entire neighborhood at first Byrd in Hand. Not to be mixed up with the Fron bar that opened in the 80s there. It was the social circle. It was a place where people gathered because there wasn't really any other place. Development was stopped by Shockoe Creek from going further west. Richmond's historic boundaries are Shockoe Creek, its ridges and ravines, kept people sort of bottled up there in Shockoe Valley. By the way, the term Shockoe Bottom probably doesn't enter the lexicon until the 70s, as probably as somewhat a promotional tool by a Bohemian poet that lived there. And so prior to that, it was usually called Shockoe Valley, or just Shockoe. Not only was it a place where people lived, it was also one of the centers of industry. The Richmond Locomotive Works was, the American Locomotive Works was built towards the north end of the neighborhood. There were all a number of factories. The Virginia Carolina Chemical Works, which created fertilizer, had their business there. But there were all kinds of small shops and hardware stores and everything else that the population needed. But also sprung up along with the saloons and the taverns and the hotels, which there were many, the Union Hotel, and a number of other places all throughout, centered around the first market. And the market really is the fulcrum around which everything turns. The General Assembly established it in 1779. It's gone through various incarnations. It started out kind of as a rough, sort of almost an awning thing with poles, then it became longer structure. About 1845, it gets turned into this wonderful building, an Italianate sort of structure with a gallery across the top of it, where not only where there were council meetings and police inquiries, and then on the bottom you had the poultry sellers and so forth. And then along the back, along Franklin Street, you've all probably seen the photographs of the carriers for everything from watermelon, carrots, everything that would come out of the garden would come to Shockoe. There was one of the more interesting stories, maybe you've heard of this, it's somewhere around the Revolution time, or just after really, just after, because there's a gentleman there, pretty kind of slovenly dressed, and he's buying a turkey, a very large turkey. And he's a big man, he's bigger than me, he's like 6'3", 6'4", but it's a big turkey. And so there's a guy there who says, well, sir, can I help you carry it? He's going up Broad Street, he's going right up that hill. But can I help you carry your turkey? Thank you very much. So this big tall guy and the guy with the turkey going up Broad Street Hill, where they walk right to John Marshall's office. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States buying a turkey at Shockoe Market. What has never not been recorded, according to Samuel Mordecai, the great historian, thank you, Samuel, is that whether he paid the guy or not. I bet he did. So this is a vital part of the community. The people who produce the food that is sold there, the people who prepare, the people who sell it in the nearby markets. Now, back to Vice, my favorite thing. Throughout the Civil War, because of the sudden influx of soldiers, it became quite known as a red light district, basically. It was where the brothels and the illegal nip joints were. And that reputation sort of waxed and waned. And finally, by the early part of the 20th century, with the spread around town of these kinds of activities, the city in its wisdom decided, as did many other cities like Chicago and other larger municipalities, is to herd it all in one place. That way you could control it. Well, the problem was, as was later found out, that a number of these houses were actually owned by people on the police commission, say, or on council. They didn't intend for them to be turned into the house of ill repute. It just happens. What am I going to do? So there was a man who got very upset about this, a guy named Aidan Allen Yoder, who is, in my book, Richmond in Ragtime, Socialist, Suffragist, Sex, and Murder, available wherever finer books are sold, and Ben's to make a good Christmas gift. Anyway, that's right, that's stuff. There was a street called Mayo, which he would he would make fun of it and say Mayor Street, because Aidan, who was a good socialist, a radical revolutionist, though conservative, he wanted you to know that, said, you know, listen, if you're going to have brothels and illegal drinking, let's make it legal. Don't waste my time and taxpayers' money paying policemen not to enforce the law. And I will share some of his remarks with you. This is, he had a publication called The Idea, which was kind of like a blog. He wrote it every week, and he was extremely mad about most things. This is just a little sample of the stylings of Aidan Yoder. Yoder often criticized Democratic Elections Chairman Clyde W. Saunders from the post office of Broad Street, St. Louis. Police Chief Warner, who's from New York City originally, Police Commissioners W. Douglas Gordon and Chris Manning Jr. and Judge Crutchfield, Justice John I. John. He was so popular, his antics were such that people at hotels would be told to go to his corporate entertainment. Yoder reviews city engineer Bowling's lack of planning in street, sewer, and public building construction and metes out harsh judgment. Few members of the city council escape the idea of sting. He even prints the winnings and losses of prominent men at the Albemarle Club, which he calls a high-class gambling joint and drinking place. When police raided Albemarle in February 1911, Yoder sniffs that it took the police long enough, and he's certain that his drawing attention to what went on there was not coincidental with police interest. Besides strong drink, Yoder remains outraged by the city's red light district centered around 15th and on Mayo Street and Locust Alley. Mayo Street does not exist anymore. It was on a neighborhood called Council Chamber Hill, the Monroe building where the education building is, that's kind of where that was. And then the highway construction got rid of the rest of it. The last square from Franklin to Main is Locust Alley. Ooh, Locust Alley. Yoder describes how the looks of the women there attest to how one can attract a fearful disease for a low price. Yoder explains, Mayo Street, from Broad to Main and the adjacent streets and alleys comprise the hotbed of crime and debauchery. There may be seen on any evening fair, thinly clad women of the midnight world openly in the streets soliciting men or telling vile jokes or boisterously laughing over their drinking and by means too debasing to mention advertising their wares. In the spring of 1910, after the idea had pointed out the evils of the red light district and some perfunctory raids and arrests had been made, the intrepid reformer takes another tour. Although window shades are drawn and signs gone, business continues as before. On the east side of Mayo, between Broad and Grace, a scarlet woman openly invited the writer to enter. Down near Main, a yellow girl stood in the porchway and called out sickly terms of endearment to the passers-by. Between Grace and Franklin, a young girl was hanging out of a window, indecently exposing her breasts below the danger line. Down on Mayo, a fearful rough house was in progress, and mere boys were vying with their elders in making the rounds of debauchery. Yoder asserts that some madams are offered police protection and that certain realtors underwrite their establishments. The frank descriptions of Mayo Street incite Police Chief Werner to charge Yoder with, wait for it, circulating obscene literature. Yay! Our boy gets sued and slammed in the jail for 12 days. We're telling it like it is, like it was. Well, eventually, the red light district in Shockoe was basically broken, mostly because of two things that happened: construction of Main Street Station and the Railroad Y. Two separate buildings, beautifully designed. It's hard to imagine any such thing today. They'd probably look radically different. But the Railroad Y was built basically to keep the railroaders away from the evils of temptation of drink and women in Shockoe. And the advent of those structures and the businesses that they brought helped to disband a lot of the upfront underground activity, though it continued. I've seen police logs talking about those sorts of things going on in the 20s and beyond. Then came Prohibition, and then it all started over again. So the other thing I want to leave you with, I don't know what my time is. I don't know, where's my time? Where am I? Who am I? Break for what? Break for Q&A. Okay, all right. Well, let's just stop there. I've rambled on enough. Thank you guys for being a very attentive audience. Hope that gives you some sort of understanding of Shockoe.
So because our numbers aren't as high as we had anticipated, I don't think we'll have a bum rush. And so feel free to raise your hand, and Harry will be answering questions.
Yes, sir.
Elizabeth Van Loo and her brother inherited ownership in a brothel. Was that brothel on Locust Street?
Probably. I don't know. But yeah, I knew that they had somehow wound up with it. And I can't remember now where it was, but I think Locust Alley actually is probably where it was. But yeah. Good work being funded.
The old Henrico County Courthouse
Yes.
was at 21st and Main.
Yeah.
Uh,
Still is.
Well, yeah. Well, where did Henrico start? Where did the county start? And where did the city end up there?
That's a long story. Basically what happened was, Henrico just basically, it's kind of like a Henrico enclave there. And we have a problem because Richmond is not part of Henrico, and Henrico's not part of Richmond. So they built the structure there, and they couldn't figure out another place to put it. So they just kept their courthouse there. And that would have been annexed in, somebody can tell me, Ed Slippick, where are you? Where was that annexed into the city? That where the Henrico County Courthouse is? Well, in 1916 or something like that?
Probably 1730s.
Was annexed that far up? 21? Okay. But so they were allowed, I thought it was the way, never mind. But they basically just left it there because they needed a courthouse. And it was really in the middle of, Richmond. It was easy to get to, too. So there it is. The building is still there. I mean, the Richardson Romanesque building that replaced the earlier building is still there. So, yes.
So I was really engaged by your story of Lincoln arriving.
Yeah, isn't that a
That's
Spielberg moment that Spielberg
Yeah,
didn't
it's
include in his movie? Probably because it was too Spielberg.
Well,
So-
so you said that what Shockoe had been was still there, right? So like,
Yes.
what would he have seen, or what would it have been like for?
Well, much more
him?
dense. It was crowded with buildings, with houses, but with also storefronts, and warehouses too, of course. And one thing that did happen like in Shockoe during this time is you got all these warehouses, and the Richmond wharves are just right there. So many of those buildings later, of course, become hospitals, and then we have Libby Prison, and we have Castle Thunder for the traders and so forth, Castle Lightning for the enlisted buckers of authority, and then, of course, Libby Prison for the federal captives. So he ends up seeing Libby Prison. He gets in a carriage, he goes around Libby Prison, and that's where he actually does, according to General Couch, who was with him by that time, General Weitzman, excuse me. Lincoln began to weep. It had been a long day, and he'd been out of Washington for almost 2 weeks at this point. And he was so ready for this to be over, as was everyone. And Weitzel asked him the question, if you were me, what would you do with these conquered people? And then Lincoln replied, I'd let them up. I can't really tell you what to do, but I would tell you this. I would let them up easy. I would let them up easy. And so he begins formulating that post-war policy that unfortunately within 3 days is over. But nobody shot at him in Richmond.
Hi, would you go into a little, right here, would you go into a little
Nice.
more detail about the development in the 20s and what else may have been found?
Oh, yes. I don't know all that was found. This is an intriguing thing that I've been doing research on. I don't know where, for instance, that boat went to. Where did they take it? They were finding all kinds of smaller, they were finding ceramic artifacts. Of course, much later, in around 2000, what was the year? When they dug up the Duval pottery, the ceramic works. That was, again, by accident. And then in 1983, not exactly in Shockoe, but where the Great Turning Basin is, that was a complete two guys showing up at the proper time at the proper place saying, why aren't you finding anything in the mud down there? This is the Great Turning Basin for the James River Canal. They happened to have their hard hats. They went down there. They used the blunt end of an epee to start probing, and they found a 90-foot long packet boat, 23 feet down. And it's instructive because most archaeology wouldn't have gone that deep. And they happened to show up when the backhoes were really way down. And that's how they found 100 boats buried under the Jamestown. They were only able to rescue 6 of them. That's a long story. That's not the 20s. But the 20s, that's an interesting period because they are digging up. They're just, and they're archaeological. I mean, there was no archaeology. They were just finding something saying, isn't that neat? And I hope some of it wound up at the Valentine or somewhere, the Historical Society, because it's a shame if it didn't. It probably is sitting on mantelpieces on hearths to this day throughout Richmond from all that digging in the 20s. I bet you. Yes? What? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna apologize because I do have two questions. Be very brief.
Okay. Two-part question. First part.
Well, two separate questions.
Oh, two separate.
First question: in your studies, have you come across information that explains why Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered in Appomattox to General Ulysses S. Grant? That's the first question. Second question, from your studies, have you seen any maps or verifications that define clearly a footprint of the enslavement burial ground at the bottom?
Well, really great question. I'll try to make a very complicated situation very short. He was being pursued. I mean, he was trying to get himself away from the Army of James and trying to get to supplies. He was hoping to get supplies were going to reach him, and he basically got it. Sheridan came down and they trapped him. And you know, there was a council held. There was someone who wanted to keep on, but Lee could see that the jig was up. I mean, it's over. Now, interesting question. The interesting part of that is the photographers who came down to Richmond the day after, and that's why we have these incredibly, and we're very fortunate to have them, all these incredible images by Gardner and people like him, is that all of the photographers came down to Richmond because the people up north wanted to see evidence that this thing had actually happened and that the war was really over, and they could make money selling them. So these incredibly stark images of the Gallagher mills and the hacksaw mills all around the Great Basin, bleak and burnt, looking like any other rich, unfortunate war scene from the 19th to 20th century on. But of course, Richmond set itself on fire, so we were bombed, but we blew stuff up ourselves. So those guys didn't go, they didn't follow the armies. We don't have a picture of the Laura McLean house or any of the Appomattox surrender field until the summer of 1865, because we're all here taking pictures. Second part, I can answer no. I don't. Elizabeth Camborian has done so much research on that, and there's other folks who are much more qualified. I think that, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to begin to tell you that I know exactly where all that
Thank you.
was. Yeah, you're welcome. And there was two somewhere here. Yes, sir.
Yeah. My name is Omar Wilder, the African Ancestral Chamber. That was a very interesting presentation that you gave us.
Thank you.
You know, all the way up into the 1970s, Henrico had a jail down there on Main Street.
That's right.
It's gone now. Do you think there was a remnant of one of the slave jails during the time of that period?
I don't know. I would think not. I think it's probably a fairly later development. The slave jails did dot all over Shockoe, but I think, well, I can't tell you that. I don't know. I'll just
I know
leave it at that.
they had many jails down there, you know, in that boat.
Yeah, well, in the Henrico County complex, there was a jail, and that building's still there, but another one was there that is gone. So, yes, sir.
Good morning, everybody. I'm fascinated with your presentation, and thank you. Thank you, Kim, for doing this, and the folks who helped you. I'm learning so much so fast in the last 3 minutes, so to speak. But my curiosity is built around, has there ever been an honest effort to archaeologically find what really did go on down in that bottom for the sake of archaeology and knowledge, and not some engineering project?
Yeah.
And would you consider what is down there, should be down there, to be found on par with what happened in Jamestown and the Rockefellers, and that we need to run out here and see if we can find a billionaire to develop it?
Marty, this is a very interesting question. There have been various archaeological efforts, but nothing, I mean, so much that's just happened by accident. the boats that found in the Great Basin were completely just two guys showing up at the right time, asking the right question, who had hard hats in their car and went down there and started digging. The Duval Ceramic Works was found practically by accident. It was not really an official archaeological dig. There had been, of course, archaeological studies of various sites. But we don't, I mean, then that's why I use the August 24 example. They just started digging. They were just digging. They didn't know, they weren't digging for anything. They were like, oh, look, we found this. We found a 20-foot long hunk of boat. Who knows what else is down there unless you take the proper precautions and look. I'm with you in that quarter. I think that, I don't know that, we'd have the same luck as they did in Jamestown, the first spade of earth, they found something. But the ground in Shockoe has been so torn up and so paved over that it might take a little while, as digging up Lumpkins testifies, to figure out what we're looking at. And the street grid's changed completely. Well, particularly that section around Main Street Station and around 17th Street East in the valley. So, yes?
Yes, I was wondering if you had discussed the origin, the original origin of the name Shockoe.
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, another long story. Well, of course, the English, thank you for asking this question. The only lexicon we have is what John Smith and Strachey, basically sitting down with the natives, having them phonetically say the words. And we know that there are many names of Powhatan Virginian origin. Possum, canoe, tobacco, moccasin. It's a whole really huge, wonderful long list. But trying to shrink down a bunch of linguist stuff, Shockoe, and I'm probably doing incredible misjustice to this, was the name of that particular place where the Shockoe Creek came out, and there were the rocks, and it was just basically a place of large stones, is what it meant. They called the creek Cheyenne, but the English just kind of blurred all of it. And so it all became Shockoe to the point where in 1737, William Byrd is writing, we're going to found a town at Shockoe's. Also, the spelling varied because, there's no Algonquin, dictionary. And so the spelling is all over the place in terms of how long, how short, and how it's spelled. But it ends up, as we say, at Shockoe, which is an extraordinary, probably way off pronunciation of how the natives would have said it. So does that answer your question somewhat?
Yes, if you know the meaning.
Place of large stones.
Thank you.
I'd like to point out a couple of points of reality. First of all, archaeologists make a living doing archaeology and do not do it for free.
That's very true.
That's point one. Point two, most of the land in the city is under private ownership. And either private ownership or city ownership. And both parties are reluctant, generally reluctant, to do anything on their property that would inhibit their ability to sell or utilize the property in the future. So if you've got something that's really cool on it and you want to sell it, then you got to find it first, and that's going to cost you money. And the third point is that really the City of Richmond is not and has never been interested in the archaeological history of the city.
We sort of have an exhibit. You're absolutely right. Circling back to the James Center find, that went on for 3 years, 3 seasons, and had not Mr. Faison, who owned it, and CSX, their largesse was what allowed those finds to occur. And to this day, everything they found, everything from boots to the ribs of parasols to watermelon seeds, and plus the remains of boats, are in disparate locations, never been properly conserved and should be exhibited in some way so that people can further understand our maritime history, which was immense. And it's one reason why we're standing here today. So he's absolutely right. It costs money. Somebody's got to pay for it. It's not, you just can't rely on the right people showing up at the right time doing the right thing. It's just too many rights.
Well, one of the things that we'll be discussing later in the program is community archaeology, where some cities across the country have taken the initiative in discovering their archaeological records.
Old Town Alexandria has had a city archaeologist for 50 years.
I'm not that old.
You didn't start it, but you're, okay. There you go. All right, exhibit A. That's what we should have in Richmond. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Harry. If folks have questions for you, can they reach you somehow?
Yes, just flash the symbol and I'll run. No. You can email me at harryk@richmag.com, harryk@richmag.com. And I will try to answer questions as I can. I appreciate you being here. I've never claimed to know anything. Thank you. Yes. Oh, harryk@richmag.com.
One of the things that Harry's presentation really outlines for us or suggests is the need for further documentation and writings about the long view of Shockoe. So there's a lot of writing and research that's yet to, that could be done. And so would encourage all of us to consider what kinds of projects we might want to undertake individually or collectively to document those stories. Yes?
I'm not the great coordinator, but I do want to share this with the audience and everybody here. The gentleman is exactly right. However, and I apologize, but you know, the good Lord got a way of making things happen. I know I turned this thing off, but I'm gonna leave that alone. That call, bottom line, there is money for the archaeology on this. And I don't know whether some of you like it. It's coming directly from the White House. I'm having a meeting tomorrow in Washington, not just on that concern, but Richmond. I want to tell you this because you all amongst you, I know I can call some of you out, ACC, Historic Black Museum, History of Lincoln Jail, Virginia Union. Okay, some of you have a direct claim to the burial ground. Okay, now whether that sits well with people or not, I don't know. But again, I'll find out more details tomorrow.
Thank you, and maybe you can share your resource and we can post it online.
Surely,
Right.
after tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes.
And as we move forward in the afternoon, we want to make sure that we really make some distinctions about the different areas of Shockoe Bottom, right? So we've got an African burial ground, we've got Lumpkin's jail site, we've got sites that we don't know yet, and then we've got the area of the proposed ballpark. So there are different areas in the whole bottom that we're talking about. And so if there are not any more questions, we're going to take, yes. It would be great, wouldn't it? We invited Miss Elizabeth Camborian to share her recent work with us, and unfortunately she's not able to be here today. But that was, we were going to really have it there for you. So if we can find another map, then we will post it up. Oh, you did? And so David has a map, and we'll put the map up as we talk. All right, so
Have you got internet access here?
All right. So we'll break for about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back for Dr. Swartz's talk, which will focus specifically on the slavery-related industry in Shockoe Bottom. You have waters there for your pleasure, and if you haven't yet purchased your lunch ticket, please do so.